guys, welcome to Brian's Man Cave. Today's another episode of awesome games from A to Z. And today's letter is P. Now, this is another one of those letters where I didn't have a whole lot of problems finding games. In fact, I might have found too many. So I tried to cut through some of them to not make this video too long. But, anyways, let's get to the games. So I always like to start off with the Atari. So let's start off with probably one of the more popular ones on the Atari, and that is Pitfall. Probably one of Activision's best games during that day. I mean, a lot of people, when they saw the advertising for this, they wanted this game. I'm sure they were dying to get it, because there was a lot of games on the Atari that, one single screen, and you just had to like rack up points. This one actually gives you this whole jungle to run through, and it gives you options. You can go this way or you can go that way. And you got all these different obstacles. You're swinging on vines. You can go down stairs. I mean, there's just so much going on in this game. It's colorful. The graphics are fun. The sound is fun. It's just all around a good game. And, probably, like I said, probably one of their best ones. Even today, I think it stacks up to a lot of the other Activision games that they put out. And the other thing is they had Jack Black do the commercial, even though he was a kid at the time and probably was not as famous as he is today. It's still interesting to see that, a young Jack Black doing a commercial. And of course there was a follow-up, Pitfall 2, which, really, stepped it up. This did a good job in taking the concept of Pitfall and creating a different world, a different environment for Pitfall Harry to, explore. And instead of just, continue on with the right-left, scrolling, this one you go down into the pits, you go into the caverns. It's actually called the Lost Caverns. Now the thing about this game is it's pretty big. There's a lot going on, there's a lot to do, and there's a lot of kind of memorizing where you have to go. Because there's actually a point to this one. Pitfall, you're literally just running and running and running, collecting objects, running and running until you run out of time, and then the game ends. This one doesn't do that. This one actually gives you a purpose. You have to find things. And when you find all the treasures, the game ends. So it actually has an ending. And I've heard that the Atari 5200 version of Pitfall 2 has a bonus level if you complete it. So that's something that's going to be on my list. I got to try. But yeah, Pitfall, definitely a must-play for the Atari 2600. Let's go to a more obvious game, PacMan. Now, who doesn't know PacMan? This is what defined the 80s as far as video games. This little yellow guy is the arcades of the 80s. And, for good reason. I mean, it came from Japan and just kind of blew away all the other video games. Like, everybody was used to games, more space games like Space Invaders and all that. So when this came out, it just created a craze. Pac-Man Fever, like the record that came out. And, this is probably the first video game to have all that stuff kind of come out, putting Pac-Man on posters, on hats, on balloons, on you name it, they made it. There was a breakfast cereal. And then there was a lot of, like, sequels, obviously, to the game. There was Miss Pac-Man, there was Pac-Man Jr. or Junior Pac-Man, Super Pac-Man. I mean, the list goes on. They still make Pac-Man games today. I remember playing Pac-Man on my Nintendo 64, There's multiple kinds of Pac-Man worlds out there. So this is definitely a must when it comes to playing any kind of video games. Another one that's kind of an interesting title, and that's Porkies. I've talked about this. I did a watch me suck at this game of Porkies before, and for good reason. I mean, the game is a little bit tough. There's a lot going on. It's awkward. It plays kind of strange, like you have to jump from a stick and do all this kind of stuff. There's multiple levels. I don't even think I've ever completed this one. But it's supposed to be based off the movie that came out in the 80s. It was kind of more of an adult's movie. But, I mean, overall, the game is interesting. So if you ever see this game on the shelf and you don't have it, probably pick it up. It's like, I don't think it's worth a whole lot of money, but at least it's interesting. It's different. Let's move on to another obvious title, Pole Position. Now this is another one of those games that kind of defined the arcade era. When you walked into an arcade and you saw one that had a steering wheel and a gas pedal, that was different than all the other ones that just had your typical joysticks. And so I'm sure this attracted a lot of people, and the fact that they got to go racing and stuff like that. And there was two cabinets, I believe. There was a stand-up one, and then there was like this whole sit-down cabinet. In fact, interesting fun fact about this game, if you're into the old British heavy metal, the band Judas Priest has a music video called Freewheel Burning, and in the video, the guy in the video is playing this game, not this one, the arcade one, where he's actually racing. But yeah, Pole Position. I mean, it's a brilliant race game. You could play it on almost every system out there. One of my fellow watchers of my show, Mr. Toon, loves this game, and he always talks about it. He's like a big Namco fan. Always talks about Pole Position. I've even played Pole Position 2, which is very similar, just graphically different, and that's for the Atari 7800. Plus, I've also done a video where I try to compare a bunch of them. But definitely a must-play. Two more that are kind of more obscure. Well, obscure to me, because I have no real experience with these games, but I have played them, and I want to play a little bit more and get used to them. One is Plaque Attack, which is kind of a odd game. You're literally a mouth, your teeth, and you're protecting said teeth with what looks like a toothpaste roll or something. It's an interesting game. I've played a game similar to this, like called Jawbreaker on the Commodore 64, but this is a little bit different. This is you're actually shooting things, so it's like a shooter game, but it's got to do with dental. I don't know if this was made by the Dental Association or something like that, but definitely an interesting game, and it is Activision. The other one is Pressure Cooker, another Activision title. This is one, again, I'm not 100% familiar with. I need to play it a little bit more, but essentially you're making food. You're making burgers, I think. And it gives you a little recipe at the bottom, and then you gotta grab the things, and it's kind of a, I like how they use the word pressure, because when you're playing it you feel like you're under pressure. But yeah, I mean, ultimately it's a pretty fun game. I just got to get used to it. It's just not really intuitive, so I just need to like play it a little bit more, possibly do a video on it. And the last one for the Atari that I want to talk about is Popeye. Now again, this is not just an Atari game. Most of these games were ported onto many systems, and a lot of them came from the arcade. This is no exception. It's an okay version on the on the Atari 2600, but I did play it on the Commodore 64 when I was younger, and that was where I got used to this game, was playing it on the Commodore 64. I even remember there was like a little cheat I was able to do when you hit the what is his name? Brutus? I forgot his name. Bluto? The big guy. When you hit him with the spinach, and you knock the little basket down on his head, he would get stuck there for the whole level. And I've tried to do that on other ports, like the Atari one. I've tried to do it on the Nintendo one, and it doesn't work. So I must have had like a glitchy game, or maybe it's all the Commodore 64 ones do it. But I do remember playing this one quite a bit, and this one's not too bad. The Nintendo one is a little bit better. This one actually is closer to the arcade. Again, another one I have to try out on the arcade is Popeye. I have to do one of my arcade game, arcade fun videos where I play this. But it's pretty fun. I mean, you're going after hearts, you're going after music notes. Ultimately, it's kind of like a Donkey Kong style game where you're just trying to get from the bottom to the top, or wherever you're trying to save your girlfriend. In fact, I do believe, as I've been told in the past, is that Donkey Kong itself was originally inspired by Popeye, or the programmer wanted to create a Popeye game but couldn't get the licensing. That's what I've heard, but anyways. So another one I wanted to talk about for the NES, I was looking at the different NES games, and that is Punch-Out! Now, this is Mike Tyson's Punch-Out!, so kind of fits in the M category, but I also wanted to bring it up here because later on, the Mike Tyson name was dropped, and the game just got released as Punch-Out! And of course, they had to create a new character to replace Mike Tyson, so they created Mr. Dream. I don't really know that version too much. I believe it's the exact same. It's just the fighter at the end is different. So I don't know if Mr. Dream fights exactly the same and they just changed the sprite around. They just changed the look of him to be a different character. If they actually created a different fighter. But I do remember when this came out, and when I saw the other Punch Out, and I thought maybe there were two different games. I didn't realize that it was just because the name, the Mike Tyson name, was no longer. I guess they had a contract or whatever to use his name, and it expired. So then they wanted to continuously re-release the game, and so they did it under a different name. So they called it Punch Out, and that's interesting. I mean, you always got to think of that with video games when they license video games, that that license will only be allowed for so long, and it gets tricky when they want to re-release these things in the future. Say they want to re-release them on different systems and all that, they got to find a way to re-release them. But if they're licensed, they might not be able to do that, and that always seems to be a kind of a hard thing to get around for these developers. They want to use licensing because that's what's going to sell, but then they kind of get stuck with the red tape or whatever they have to do, or they have to pay somebody a lot of money just to keep that license going. But this one's okay, and I used to be able to complete it. I'm just not as quick anymore. Moving on to some Commodore 64 titles. I don't have many, but the two I wanted to talk about was Phantom of the Asteroids, which again, kind of an obscure title that I don't know if it's on any other system. It probably is. It's another one of those games that probably got ported all over the place, but I had fun with this one. I remember picking it up, and just from the picture of it, and it looked fun. I have played it again recently, but I need to give it another go. It's a little bit hard. You got to really explore this world, and it just takes some time and memorization, I think, just to get through the levels. But overall, kind of a fun game, kind of interesting. The other one that I wanted to talk about is another racing game that I used to play, and that's Pit Stop. That one kind of like Pole Position, but I like Pit Stop because, like the name says, you actually had to go through a pit stop every once in a while, because when you're driving, your tires would start to wear down, your gas would start to run out, and you'd have to go into a pit stop. You'd have to use the pit crew, come in, pull the tires off, put new tires on, put gas in the car. I found that fascinating. I don't know why, but I thought that was a lot of fun. It was just different, and I kind of enjoyed that. The last one I want to throw out there is one that I only really played. I have played on Nintendo, but I started playing it on the Game Boy. This guy right here, Paperboy. I don't know why I wanted that game, but when I first got my Game Boy, that's the original one right there. When I first got my Game Boy, in it was 89, 90, sometime around there, there was two games I picked up with it. Super Mario Land, which I had to have, and Paperboy. And I don't know what fascinated me towards Paperboy, perhaps the box artwork or something. I never played it before then, and I didn't have it on the real Nintendo, and I've never played it in the arcades. But it did look fascinating, and it was different. Again, I kind of like these games that were different, that, kind of going away from the status quo. And this one, the idea that you're delivering newspapers was kind of, it's different and novel. And, I was kind of like, who thought of this? But regardless, I had fun playing it. And on the Game Boy, I was able to get pretty far. Now, I have tried it again, or I have tried it on the Nintendo, and I didn't get very far. So I don't know what the difference is, or if I just lost my rhythm to the game or something like that. But regardless, it's still one of my top games that when I play Game Boy, that's one I'm going to throw in there. Anyways, that's my little list of P games. I mean, there's a lot more. I think I don't know if I pulled out all the other ones. I didn't go through like Sega and all the other systems because I knew there was a lot to go through with just Atari. But anyways, let me know what you think. Throw some comments down below. If I missed any games, throw it down there. I know there's a few Atari titles I didn't talk about. Feel free to throw it down there if you have any experiences with them. Let me know what you think. Hope you subscribe to my channel. Talk to you later.